Good evening, everyone. My name is Liam Moore. I'm a staff member at the American Brain Foundation, and I want to welcome you this evening for Music, Art, and Dementia with Dr. Daniel Potts and Susan Magsamen. Our host for the evening is Susan Schneider Williams. Susan is a fine artist, landscape painter, and advocate for brain disease research, specifically Lewy body dementia. Susan has become a prominent voice for Lewy body disease, or LBD, and brain research since the discovery of her husband Robin Williams' diagnosis of LBD in autopsy. She was a producer on the 2020 release documentary film Robin's Wish, centered around Robin's final years and his experience with LBD. She has lobbied in Washington, D.C. for better diagnostics, increased funding, and support for researchers, doctors, and clinicians. Susan received our Commitment to Cures Award in 2016 in recognition for her advocacy. She served on the board at the American Brain Foundation for 6 years, with 4 of those years as our vice chair. She was instrumental in setting up our Lewy Body Dementia Fund and currently serves on our Ambassadors Council. Susan, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Liam, and welcome everyone. We're so glad you could join us tonight. We are going to learn about music, art, and dementia, including how music and art can benefit the brain, and specifically how caregivers can incorporate music and art into caring for their loved ones with dementia. Webinars, events like this tonight are opportunities to connect with you, to connect you with experts in various topics of interest around the brain and neurological care. I invite you to put your questions into the Q&A at any time. And after the presentation, which is around 20 to 30 minutes, we'll try to address those questions as best we can during the Q&A session. The American Brain Foundation funds research across the whole brain, knowing that brain diseases, disorders, and injuries are interconnected. The ABF cannot exist without support from our donors, and our donors. If you are so moved, please make a donation so that we can continue funding critical research and continue to host free webinars like tonight's event. You can give at theamericanbrainfoundation.org/donate or scan the QR code on your screen. Thanks to a very generous donor, every gift until the end of the year will be matched. So please consider giving tonight. Let's move into our topic of conversation, music, art, and dementia, with our panelists, Susan Magsamen, Daniel Potts, MD, singer, author, photographer, neurologist with the Tuscaloosa VA Medical Center, and author Susan Magsamen, founder and executive director of the International Arts and Mind Lab, Center for Applied Neuroaesthetics at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, and co-director of the NeuroArts Blueprint. I'm so excited to be here with both of them tonight, and I know you guys are going to love this discussion. Thank you, Susan and Dr. Potts, for joining us.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Really, such a gift.
Yes.
Yeah, in our little brief discussion before we joined all of you, we could see very quickly there's a lot of crossover here, a lot of really good matching points here between Susan and Danny's experience and what they're working on currently. So let's, first of all, I'd like to start the discussion with each of you telling us briefly, just introduce yourself and how tonight's topic relates to your work.
Okay, so I'll jump in and then turn it over to Dan. Well, first of all, good evening. It's 8 o'clock in Baltimore, so or good afternoon to wherever you are, or good morning. It really is a pleasure to be here. I started the International Arts and Mind Lab in 2007 because we had a donor at Johns Hopkins that believed the arts could save us. And it's sort of extraordinary because in so many ways, on a very personal level, I have seen that throughout the last 20 years. Our lab is very focused on mental health and well-being, and also through the NeuroArts Blueprint, which is an initiative with the Aspen Institute, where we are building this field of neuroaesthetics. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means in a moment. We've been really very much focused on the arts across the lifespan. So thinking about how the arts can be helpful in prevention and protection and building resilience with young people, all the way through to end-of-life care, and including neurodegeneration, but also healthy brain aging, and have done quite a bit of work with AARP. But on a personal level, this work with dementia and the arts has been touched home for me. My dad died about 2 months ago of Lewy body dementia, where we were able to be with him, and he found singing and listening to music to be very comforting to him, almost as if a magic wand had been woven over him. And then currently I care for our cousin who has frontal temporal dementia, which is very different, manifests in very different ways. And we call her the astonishing, vanishing Wendy. And Wendy plays Scrabble and is obsessed with Downton Abbey, and she still can knit. And so it's really extraordinary to see the ways that aesthetic experiences and motor learning really makes a difference in staying connected. And I think that connection to each other and relationship is so important. And one of the things that I think the arts allow us to do, and as we understand the neural mechanisms of that, I think it becomes more exciting to think of these things as treatments. So let me turn it over to Dan.
Susan, thank you. And Susan, thank you. It's an honor to be with you all. First of all, I want to say I respect everything that you've done in this space, really forwarding arts and healthcare, and really arts across the lifespan with your work. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. Well, I'm a neurologist from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I work at the VA, so I take care of veterans every day. I've also worked in academic settings and in private practice. Both of my parents had Alzheimer's disease. My father died in 2007, the year that Susan started her lab, and then my mother passed away this June of Alzheimer's disease. And I really, although I've always been artistic, my mother was a voice teacher, a piano teacher. I never really was aware of the benefit of the arts and creativity in a medical setting until my father's experience with Alzheimer's disease. And so my dad attended an adult daycare program, and I'll speak more about that, but this is just to tell you why I'm doing what I'm doing. And Dad really discovered that he was an artist at that program, having never painted before. And so his art over about 4 years really got a hold of me in ways that are difficult for me to describe. First of all, they ignited my own creativity. And second of all, they got me interested in what was going on in his brain, what was going on in the community around him, who were all benefiting from Dad's creativity, and how he got better, in fact, stabilized cognitively for some time while he was painting. And so I was in a dark place at the time, a very tough place, but I subsequently met an art therapist named Angel Duncan, who is still, I'm sure, very much involved with, and she's a great friend of mine. And she began to educate me on the expressive arts therapies. And so since that time, I have done everything I can to be in contact with people living with dementia and making art with them and engaging in creativity with them, and have spent hundreds of hours with hundreds of patients so far, people living with dementia who are expressing themselves through this, as well as caregivers. So I love that, and it keeps me going, and it also has ignited my own creativity. So I write poetry all the time. I write songs. I'm not a very good visual artist, but I do take photos. And so I'm trying to find ways to bring those into my medical practice, which we can also touch on. But it's just great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you both. As we were saying, so Danny, you said it was okay if I call you Danny.
Oh, yes.
So Danny,
yes.
You are basically a demonstration. You're demonstrating Susan and Ivy Ross's book, Your Brain on Art, right? I mean, you're living it through your work and also your personal expression of art. And what I think it's important to for everyone in the audience to understand that when we're talking about art, please describe it for us, Susan. It's not just the visual arts. It's not just music. Please go ahead and give us what neuroscience is in art.
The way that I think about art and aesthetic experiences, we describe it as creative expression. And that can be visual arts, it can be poetry, it can be singing, it can be dancing, it can be gardening, it can be cooking, it can be virtual reality. It can be any way that you creatively express yourself. And I think that list of ways to do that is growing and changing all the time. And it's uniquely human. It's something that other species don't do, right? We are the only species that really does this type of creative expression. And, as Danny was talking, what I think is so beautiful is that, he's a physician. He is a son. He's also an individual who is experiencing loss and caregiving and processing and serving a community. And what words that came to my mind when he was talking is this idea of humanizing medicine. That we so often don't have solutions to some of the most intractable problems like dementia. And to see the arts become a way that actually relieves symptoms, can prolong cognitive gain and acuity, and that's enormously beneficial when you're trying to stabilize someone who is losing cognitive skills, but also to be able to lower someone's anxiety and their level of frustration, and to reduce the use of medication sometimes that limits their accessibility, is so extraordinary that we have this physiological ability to use arts and aesthetic experiences to really modulate our emotional life and our moods and our physiology is pretty extraordinary. And we're just now starting to understand that as we've been able to non-invasively start to study through imaging and other kinds of biomarkers, what's happening inside our heads when we're engaged in these kinds of creative experiences.
Right. And I want to point out there's the difference of, there's not really there is a difference so there's the making of art, but there's also the beholding of art. And I think that's a real important point as well for people to understand as caregivers and as people living with dementia, that even just going to behold art in some way or on a nature walk outside and maybe interpreting that later just through drawing, it's the making of it and beholding of it both have a powerful effect on our neurology. And also regarding what you just said, Susan, and Danny, you might be able to say whether this is true or not. I would imagine that engaging in these arts and this creative expression could help the efficacy of certain therapeutics that are already being employed to make them received better, or and perhaps maybe make some of the side effects lessen in some way.
Well, I think you're exactly right. And that touches on, Susan, the benefit of the arts and creativity for not only people living with these conditions and their care partners, but also for the healthcare team that is participating in their care. I mean, there are a lot of studies looking at mindfulness also, and the benefit of engaging in mindful activities. If you are if you're an intern, for instance, or if you're a physician, a resident, a nurse, social worker, the same thing happens if you are engaged aesthetically. And so you're supporting your own wellness so that you'll be able to be engaged better. You'll be a better listener. And there's some studies that show that you're a better listener. You have more empathy for individuals who have these conditions. And so it really broadens out. And it's like Susan talks about, there's so many, there's no need in limiting this. I mean, I know we have to limit it for our discussion, but the benefit is so broad, and the entire healthcare team and all components of the team can benefit from engaging aesthetically and engaging with mindfulness and artistic expression and beholding.
Excellent. So Susan, I've got a question for you. So why might people with dementia retain emotional connections, memories, and abilities related to art and music longer than other cognitive functions? Or I'll put that out to either one of you.
Well, maybe I'll start and then turn it over to Danny. And I'll start with a story. Oliver Sacks was fascinated by this. He had learned about Connie Tomago, who was doing work in New York, bringing her guitar in and playing guitar and singing with Alzheimer's patients. And these were patients, some of them were mild and moderate, but some of them were quite advanced. And what she found was that they literally woke up. And Oliver Sacks was fascinated with this idea of awakening. And I always think that's so fascinating because Robin, your husband, was in the film Awakening about Oliver Sacks. But Oliver had a very curious beginner's mind and really sought out Connie. And what she could really show was that people remembered autobiographical music. They remembered the songs from childhood. So I mentioned Wendy. I sing with Wendy, and my husband and I sing with Wendy once a week, and we sing "You Are My Sunshine," "Row, Row, Row Your Boat," "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," "Amazing Grace." All of the songs that are just embedded. And what happens with dementia, it's often the hippocampus is one of the first areas that gets engaged with plaque. And so the hippocampus is, a part of where memory is stored, where you recall memory. But because the saliency of music first is recorded in the hippocampus, but then is distributed in other parts of the brain because it's so salient, when the hippocampus no longer is functioning, you can recall information from other parts of the brain. So from the auditory cortex, from the default mode network, from the prefrontal cortex, the brain stores this memory, this knowledge synaptically in other parts of the brain. So they're able to recall. So literally there is a awakening that happens because it's so emotionally and meaningful to people, and it's just a recall. And so I think that's really extraordinary. And so in those moments, there is that emotional connection. And sometimes, and we've seen this in a number of different studies, depending upon where someone is in the progression of an illness, will continue to be alert and connected, sometimes just minutes, sometimes hours, sometimes days. And so it's a phenomena that we're really starting to understand more and more.
So go ahead, Danny.
No, that's perfect because the mention of this autobiographical memory is so important in dementia care because if we can tap into that somehow, then we're going to access a part of the person that most of the world cannot see anymore. So one of the things about dementia care that we feel is so important is that it has to be person-centered, and that there has to be a belief there that the human being still persists despite all of these deficits that we in medicine are really good at labeling and looking at. We have to see that the person is there. Therefore, we can build a care plan and build an environment that is supportive of that personhood. And it's very relational. And so the autobiographical memory that people have, which is sort of the running movie of their lives based on these salient experiences that they've had, the expressive arts tap into those, and none more powerfully than music. I mean, in the hippocampus, of course, we know it gets nuked in Alzheimer's disease with plaques, it's also important, as Susan mentioned, in weaving memories together and distributing them in other parts of the brain. But when it does that, these memories are more resilient. They're more immune to the attack of pathologies, and so they can be rendered out for all of us to see. And one interesting thing is that sometimes the hippocampus, although it's initially involved in laying down these memories, it becomes less involved with retrieving them later, so that when the pathology advances, and the hippocampus is no longer as much online as it was for these folks, you can still tap into the rich memories that are there, the very salient ones.
Wow, that was fantastic. So you both talked about saliency, and This is a term, Susan, that is in your book, your Brain on Art, quite a bit, and it really, you both made it very clear how. So create, just describe in specifically salient memories and what that looks like, how a memory is laid down. My understanding is that when it's something that's really important, when you're emotionally fully tuned in, present, maybe there's music going on, maybe you smell something, maybe it's, a first kiss, there's all this emotion going around it, so that it's laid down not just on one track, whatever that memory is, it's laid down on several tracks. Is that kind of a description of salient?
Maybe I'll start
Susan.
again, Dan.
Susan,
I love it.
yeah, you want me to start or you want to go?
I feel like we're in a duet. Beautiful. I love it. I love it. So, even just to back up a little bit, you're born with about 100 billion neurons, and those neurons connect at a synaptic level. And the only way that can happen is what you bring into your body, right? Into the central systems, whether that's touch, smell, taste. And so it's vision. So it's really extraordinary that we have these mechanisms that are so powerful. And, my hearing is really good. It's probably not, my eyesight's probably not as good as my hearing, but we all have our own sort of fingerprint of sensorial experiences and how we bring them into our bodies that create these synaptic connections, that create neural pathways that connect structure and function. And they are reinforced through repetition and through practice and through lived experience, right? And so it turns out that scent, which olfactory, is so meaningful for memory because the olfactory bulb is very close to the hippocampus, but also the limbic system. And so it makes sense that smell is very both memory oriented, but also highly emotive for us. But the saliency network, saliency basically is what's important to you emotionally or practically. And that makes sense, right? You couldn't possibly bring in and process all of the things that are happening around you all the time. It's just quadrillions and zillions, infinite amount of information. And so we each have that ability to hone in on what is going to keep us alive. And I think that we're going to react to and respond to. And I think that's what is so unique about this idea of highly personalized care for patients and people living with dementia or other kinds of neurodegenerative issues, because those are the keys to the door, right? They're the way that you open up these pathways and you help to reignite pathways that may be dormant, that may be in different parts of the brain that are no longer functioning appropriately. And so it really is amazing. And the default mode network and the saliency network, those are systems that we're just really beginning to understand. I was also going to mention the cerebellum, and which is sort of more motor oriented, and I think it's also very old. You need this sort of motor coordination, and you often see dancers remember a dance movement if they were, because motor memory, right, is so embedded. And so you've seen dancers who have dementia hear Swan Lake and they come to life and can move through the entire movement. And so I think that's another sort of example of that.
It's beautiful. And the music is one of those things that's so the reward associated with that in the brain is phylogenetically old. It's like it was a part of survival for our species, for salient music experiences. And so you get surges of all of these chemicals that we hear about all the time, dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin and others that increase the saliency of this, and the reward we get from hearing a song that's one of our grandmother's favorite songs or whatever. We've had these relational experiences in the past with these, and so the emotions are there.
And what's also, I think, amazing, and to me this is that there are very few things that are really good for us that we love, right? And the arts are one of them, like, reward, right? Oxytocin, the love hormone, all of these neurotransmitters that make us feel good. And when it feels good, you want to do it again, right? And I think there's something, if that's a double bottom line or a silver lining, or it actually is about pleasure. And I think we undervalue the value of joy and pleasure, and we're now seeing that lack of connection is causing disease. And so these pieces all come together in such a virtuous cycle that it sometimes blows my mind.
That was well said. And yeah, I have to say, as soon as Danny was saying the word reward, it's like, am I the one who was like, wait, reward? Like what? Like,
Yeah, like what?
again, like all we have to do is listen. And now I don't know if you guys have done this already, but I'd heard, and this, I did this I don't know, 6 months ago or so, but I compiled a list of songs that I used to listen to in my high school days. And that was an experience in itself, going back to the musicians and bands and titles and comparing it with my older brother, and he reminded me of some, and I compiled that list, and I distributed it to some members of my family, and I said, if I ever get bonked on the head, here's some songs, to help unlock. And anyway, that was kind of on my list to do. I felt like, it's good to know, and things are encoded back in there.
And the memories that come with that remembering of that song, right? It's not just that someone remembers the song, it's the memories that song holds. And we haven't really even begun to tap into how those memories are stored, bucketed within that song. My family, I have 4 sisters, and every year we do a we call it Girls Trip, and we always invariably start singing all the songs from when we were growing up, and the stories that come out that you're like, oh my God, right? So it is a great tip, like make a playlist.
Right.
Make a playlist, because I just had my 40th high school reunion, so that tells you my age. But anyway, so I was going back through. I created the video, and I was trying to choose appropriate songs for the video of the class. And so I tapped into those songs that you're talking about, and it's amazing the memories that came up. You remember where you were at certain times when you heard some of those songs. I remember I was sitting in my Ford Escort one time, getting ready to go to an after school event, and I heard a Madonna song, or I heard a Journey song, or what, and you're back there. And so I'll ask my wife. So she's a musician, and we talk about this all the time, as are my daughters, and we talk about these things. And I said, Ellen, was that summer of 82? No, she said it's 83. It was 83. I remember because so-and-so. And it's incredible, Susan, how that can tap in that precisely to a memory.
Yeah, and you would never know it if somebody asked you the question. You might not even remember it at all. But yet, if you hear that piece of music, it's like ding. And also the emotional resonance of that song. Like, I can remember breakup songs. I can remember songs that, like, my brother-in-law died, and do you know that song, I Believe There Are Angels Among Us? I still can't listen to that song without sobbing, because it was the song that we sang for my brother-in-law. And it is the closest thing to magic. To come back to that moment, to reignite a memory, is amazing. The other thing I have to say this, because Dan, I think you're probably a good singer. I can't carry a tune. Can't paint, terrible, write really shitty poetry. I dance like Elaine on Seinfeld. It's still good for you. Like, you don't have to be good at it. It's nice if you are, for others around you, but you don't have to be good at it. And I think that's also really important. It's this mechanism, not the perfection of it, that really is important. And obviously, the more you practice, the more you get better at anything. And I love that your dad got better at painting. That's sort of extraordinary. And I think practice does help to build skills. but you don't have, like, just journaling, writing down things that you're thinking, doodling, humming in the shower, singing in the car, all those things are really valuable for igniting these different neural pathways for different purposes, or just going into a museum and or a gallery, or taking a nature walk. And so we're not talking about high art or learning how to draw necessarily. It's being exposed to the smell of paint and the way your hand moves around with a marker or a paintbrush, or weaving the text. You have 3,000 touch receptors in every finger, and they go through the thalamus and the somatosensory cortex, and they change your brain based on that texture. Holding someone's hand, when it's a hand that you want to hold, actually releases oxytocin, and it connects us, it binds us to each other in beautiful ways.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, there's so much here, you guys. I'm thinking just about so much. I mean, Susan, the kazoos and 5,000 neurologists, but which, put a pin in that. I do want you to bring that forward, but I want to be sure that we cover for everybody. I want to hear both of you of I really want to help the caregivers and people living with dementia with specifics on how can caregivers use music or art in everyday interactions with loved ones who have dementia to enhance the communication and connection. So just I know we've kind of talked in a broad sense and neurological sense about these things and their effects, but specifically, like, real simple. And I'm thinking about doodling, even, Susan, how you talk about that in the book, and doodling. Anyway, I'll let you both take it. And I'd just love to hear some real specifics that you use in your practice, Danny, or in your personal lives as well.
Susan, go on, I'll follow you.
Oh, okay. I'm going to start at a little bit of a model that I think is an important one. In the book that Ivy and I wrote, we talk about something called the aesthetic mindset. And I want to start there because I think it helps to, I don't think anybody can or wants to do more. It's really about changing your lens on the things that you're already doing. And I think changing your mindset, changing your perspective, or shifting, like a kaleidoscope. You move a kaleidoscope a teeny bit and the whole universe changes. And that's how I feel about introducing more arts and aesthetic experiences for caregivers, and for people that you're caring for. And I think that's important. Caregiving is emotionally and physically exhausting. And it's something that you have to really think about self-care. But these 4 neuro kind of aesthetic mindsets, I think, can be helpful. And one is coming to the work with curiosity, and that's a beginner's mind, right? Like being open to seeing things in a different way. We all, when we're tired and we're sort of extended, we tend to become very transactional, and these relationships can be very transformational. So thinking about how might you be curious about how you might, move very simple things in the day, how you might move where you are in a room, or maybe changing, being curious about what if you turned the channel to, from Fox to CNN, or from CNN to Fox. I mean, you're really thinking that maybe it's a different kind of music, but being curious about what you might do. The second is what I call playful exploration. And it's just doing stuff together without needing to finish anything. Like maybe you start a puzzle, you don't worry about finishing it. Maybe you're, playing with reading, a page in a book. That's it. You're very interested in exploring, but not, maybe it's walking in a garden, and that's enough. And the third is really opening up to sensory experiences. What's the temperature feel like? What does it smell like? And sharing that with each other, but using your sensory systems to help you feel more alivened. And, even just being near a window, being near nature, being in around nature images can really change mood for both you and the person that you're working with. And then the last is thinking about when are you making and when are you beholding, and being a little more intentional about that. So as I said earlier, finding there's this new word that's showing up right now called glimmers. And there are these micro moments where you might see light shining in through a window and you note it, or it might be that somebody's laughing and that's a glimmer. And you start to train your mind to look for these moments of glimmers. And the idea is the opposite of a glimmer is a trigger. And so how do you start to shift from triggers where you're exhausted or you're stressed or you feel that anxiety to where there are these moments of surprise and wonder? And research is telling us in just 15 minutes of shifting that mindset, of having that sort of respite space, can lower cortisol and give you more cognitive load. And I think that's something that we all need. So finding 15 minutes in your day to be able to have that space to be able to do that.
That was great. Thank you. Danny.
That's beautiful. And that's exactly why I deferred to you, because I think setting it up with that mindset that you talk about is the way to then open the space for interaction over the arts or maybe other mindful activities. So it's very important to be present moment centered when you're working with somebody with dementia. And look, I'm bad at future tripping and past tripping. Those have characterized a lot of my life. But since I went through what I did with Dad as an only child and a neurologist who felt like a failure, basically, because I couldn't provide the right care for him, and I couldn't advise my mother about how to do that either. And about how that left me completely bereft afterwards and searching. And so I'm just being honest with you. I was in a bad place after that. And so I needed help. And one of the things that happened to me is I was so disconnected with not only others, but also myself, with my spirituality, et cetera. And so with help and support and recovery and all of those things, I was able to become the kind of individual that Susan talks about. So I can walk by a lamppost now, and if it's set in a particular way against the sky, I might sit there and cry for a bit about it. Now, people think that's crazy, but I'm telling you that the aesthetic way of living is saving me. And through me, I hope it can help to save some other folks. And so I've brought that into my medical practice. I brought that into discussions that I've had with caregivers. When I speak to caregivers, when I teach students, I bring that in. So we have a course I called, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to touch on this because it helps to illustrate this. We have a course called Bringing Art to Life, which is a service learning course that brings the expressive arts to students and people living with dementia. And we mainly work with in an art therapy model. But one of the things that we do in that course is we not only teach people about the neuroscience of dementias, but we also bring mindfulness in. We bring the theory about why the expressive arts work and the aesthetic way of life. And so it helps to open the students' eyes about these opportunities that are there. It's really a different way of looking. And so if you bring that into the caregiving space, then it really opens a whole host of things. And it's not about any products, it's about the process. And so if Dad is having a tough time getting in the bath in the morning, we can do things like, because we know Dad's favorite songs, we know Dad's playlist, we can put a quiet song on as we're doing that, and we can sing along with him as we're trying to accompany him to the bathroom. If somebody's having a tough time going to sleep at night, we might do the same thing with a song that's calming. And there's data to show that helps people sleep. We can have aesthetic experiences in nature, like Susan talked about. And of course, we have to think about safety. We have to think about wandering. We have to be safe about it. But looking at a sunset can be very powerful if we get a safe way to do that. interacting with others over a collage, perhaps. We can do some collage work with people. That's easy to do at home. We can take photos with a cell phone and talk about things. We can look at nature photos. We can engage over art, or we can try writing. But there are so many things we can do right there in the home. If you look around your home, there are 100 opportunities, if you have the right mindset, to engage somebody in creativity.
Wow. Just to add to that, sometimes an attachment object like a stuffed animal or a baby, or so one time I asked Wendy, I said, Wendy, how do you do this? You're in a new place, how do you, I'm just so in awe. And she said, I have a PhD in imagination. This is amazing to me. And I think we forget that imagination is still very active. And so, storytelling and this, and really creating these narratives that, Wendy has an imaginary son, and his name is Christopher. And we talk about how Christopher's doing and what's he doing for Christmas. And we make this whole story up. And it's real for me, it's real for Wendy. And so I think humor is also another thing that shifts the energy. And in many ways, this is about the energy, right? If you're tense, the person that you love is going to be tense. They can feel it. And, and sometimes you create that, you start to shift that energy, and everything transitions. And I think, as we were just talking about, and as Danny said, that music, the vibration is so fast, in just 3 milliseconds, you hear a sound. And so that vibration, the kind of vibration can change us instantly. And you don't have to be a neuroscientist to be able to use these tools instantly to help create the energy that you're trying to it can be dimming lights. We all tend to be in very bright lights that are not lumen comforting. They tend to keep us awake. So how do you start to change lights? How do you start to change temperature? Melatonin. I mean, melatonin. Just going outside in the morning helps to show your brain that the melatonin needs to get turned off, right? Something as simple as just walking outside for 5 minutes will help to get your brain's melatonin cycles working, because that, we need those on and off moments that help with, sleepwalkers. So there's so many little micro things, little things that really make big difference.
Wow, you guys, thank you so much. We should hop to the Q&A now. So there are so many great questions. We'll just get started here. And so let's see. Opinion on things like reading and socializing in order to lessen chances of developing dementia. So reading and socializing as a means to lessen our chances of developing dementia. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I can start in the Susan. I think so. Those are activities that are part of creating an enriching milieu for our brains, and certainly positive social interactions with those that we enjoy being around, engaging fiction, poetry. All of the cultural experiences, there's a lot of data to show from the World Health Organization, et cetera, that individuals who participate in cultural experiences, going to an opera, going to a play, going to a museum, just a few times a year, have a lower incidence of cognitive decline, as they get older. So I think, I would consider those things, especially those social engagements, to be supportive of cognitive health throughout the lifespan.
I can just add that AARP has been extremely interested in brain health activities, things that help you stay active and keep your brain healthy. And they just launched something recently called Brain Health Action Network. And lots of ideas that are arts oriented, that are meditation and mindfulness. There's about social connections. And the idea is that the younger you are And the more you use these cognitive abilities and skills, and the healthier your brain is. And so obviously exercise is important, and good nutrition and good sleep, but so are these arts and aesthetic practices that can become part of your daily life. And so I don't think you can start early enough. And I mentioned in the beginning how the protective and preventative things that we can do with young children is really important. But, the great promise and truth of neuroplasticity is it's never too late. You can always strengthen your neural pathways. And so even if you feel like, oh, I haven't done it, get started. And singing in choirs is really wonderful. One of many people talk about that dancing, even if you're dancing online in a Zoom dance forum, but that social connection, that synchronicity with others is super important.
And this is for even people that are already living with neurodegenerative diseases. There's evidence that this works. It preserves cognition. It helps prevent falls, many benefits.
And also compliance. People that are doing these activities will take medication, will do the kinds of things they're supposed to do to stay healthy. And, if you feel like you don't have something to live for, you might not do the things that are good for you. And these activities also, and I love this term, I used to not understand quality of life. What does it mean to have quality of life, no matter where you are in your life? And I think this is another thing that happens with this work.
That's great. Okay, here's another question. So this is from an occupational therapist. Let's see, is this why an aphasic, am I saying that correctly? APHASIC stroke patient can sing even though they can't speak? Are their brains picking up things from other areas? As an occupational therapist, I've seen this in my experience and often wondered how they were able to do that.
Well, yeah, they're recruiting different pathways, and so they're bypassing a lot of the, sometimes Broca's area, the area for expressive speech comes offline with things like strokes, but can also come offline with PTSD, traumatic experiences. We begin to lose the ability to use that, and many people with aphasia, with dementia, will actually become aphasic as well. But music is particularly beneficial for those folks. And I think a lot of it has to do, Susan, with emotional expression, being able to express what's inside you when you can't get it out any other way through language. I know that was important with my dad.
Wow. Okay. Terrific. Okay, so let's see. There is much research attesting to the effectiveness of music, art, and health. It's an age-old subject. So why, once and for all, are doctors not actually prescribing formal music therapy treatment interventions for patients of various diagnoses, especially geriatric patients, instead of simply medicating them when music could do a better curative job? Everyone talks about how good the arts are in health, but nothing medically official is ever undertaken. Why?
Well, that's changing. And I think that's a really important thing to say.
Yes.
And this is, so the artists got there way before the scientists, right? Artists have always known the intuitive power of the arts. And I think that, the Industrial Revolution and the Age of Reason really slapped the arts down and said, if we don't understand this, it can't be important. And that legacy has really been very pervasive. And, as you saw science become the holy authority, the arts started to really be seen as a nice to have, not a have to have. And I think we have relegated the arts to something that is very minimal to the power of what they are neurophysiologically. And I feel like the true unity of the marriage of arts and sciences is now happening, where it's bidirectional, and we're seeing arts and science, basic science, social sciences coming together to really to show the evidence of what is happening. And what we need is the evidence to create the kind of policy and funding and sustainability. So we are seeing social prescribing or arts on prescription. We're seeing some healthcare providers like Blue Cross and Aetna and others starting to do very large scale pilots. I've seen other health providers like Kaiser look at how or institutions are designed. Design and architecture and space, that's always going to get paid for, but how you do it well, knowing what we know about neuroaesthetics and neuroarchitecture, can make spaces be more healing places. We're seeing more of that. But I think we're at the beginning, especially in this country, of beginning to really create the models for sustainability in healthcare. But we also need it in public health. We also need it in education. We also need it in in prisons, in the justice system. This work is applicable in many, many sectors. I'm seeing museums expand their missions to be to not only think about arts and learning, but arts and well-being. And what does that mean in the community, right? And so it's changing, and that's this NeuroArts Blueprint work that I've been working on with the Aspen Institute, and many, many, many partners around the world are really building a field that's called NeuroArts, that's based on the science of neuroaesthetics, which is many ways of knowing to understand how the arts change us and how that translates into practices in health, well-being, learning, community development, et cetera. So it's happening. It should have happened a long time ago, but I think we now are mobilized for an entirely new way. And, when Ivy and I, this book came out, we started to hear from a lot of people about feeling like the book validated what they already knew. But I think the big thing is, coming out of COVID, I think we all want something more. We want to use what we intuitively know that makes us healthy and whole. And Dan, I love that you talked about living an aesthetic life. I feel like sometimes it's moment by moment, right? But we should have systems in place that allow anybody, race, class, gender, to be able to have access to the arts. It should not be something that's seen as an elite thing. And I think that's really what we're moving toward. That's a great question.
It's a beautiful response. And I think, you have a lot to do with what's happening in your lab. People like Bruce Miller, people like Anton Chatterjee, people like Renee Fleming and others, people in the expressive arts therapies are really pulling this forward. I do think you're right. I think COVID exposed us a lot. It exposed a lot of our deficiencies. It exposed a lot of our inner deficiencies. It exposed a lot of our disparities and made the setting right for this. We have to do a better job. So, and look, I'm preaching to the choir. I'm a physician, and 20 years ago, I wasn't attuned enough to this, and so I had a personal experience to pull me into that. But we have to educate our students better. One of the reasons we started this course is because of that very thing. To take pre-psychology students, pre-health students, pre-nursing, pre-social work, et cetera, get them in relationships with mainly geriatric people who have neurodegenerative diseases in a creative setting with expressive arts therapists, and see what happens with that. And what we found is happening is it's transforming the students. It's a transforming educational experience. And most of it is because of the relationships they're able to build with people with dementia. And the people with dementia are thriving in that situation. The creativity is good for them, but also the opportunity to give back. They feel like they're teaching the kids. They feel like they're mentoring the kids. And that is actually happening. So people look at folks like my dad and others. He couldn't possibly have anything to teach anybody. That's not true. So the kids are really learning from those folks, and so it's building empathy. And we've looked at that, and we've published about that. So the empathy goes up in people compared to a traditional learning experience in a Psych 101 course. This course builds empathy, and it reduces stigma. And I think that the main driver of stigma is this perceived loss of personhood. I keep coming back to that. But in order for us to make a difference, we've got to get these programs funded. And in order to get them funded, we've got to have people highlighting the research. And that's what Susan's doing. So we're highlighting the research behind these therapies and this creativity and art that we all intuitively knew worked. But for people to pay for it, they've got to have research behind it, and we've got to be able to prove it.
And I also think that the research makes the practice better. When like any field, right? The more you know, the more you can use. And with the students, what we find is there's more of a tolerance for ambiguity and living in those liminal spaces where, we're not just sort of prescribing or defining someone as their symptoms, but we're understanding complexity. And we're much more complex than the way that medicine, I think, has allowed us to understand. And I think that's really an important piece to this also, is how do you really think through that in a really careful way. And I wanted to add that another way that you get policy is by explaining, we spend more money in the last years of someone's life on healthcare than in their entire life. And so what we've been focusing on with the blueprint is an economic analysis. We've done two. The first one, we saw a 3-to-1 return on investment when you use just singing as an intervention for frustration and for anxiety for the patient. Now we're doing something called a true value economic analysis that looks at what happens with the caregiver and the ecosystem around a patient. And that's going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks, but it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing how much we actually save when we do something as simple as singing through creative arts therapies or other arts and health models. And, there's a range of the way practitioners enter into this space. So it's also a job creation space where people are really able to bring this forward in a way that we haven't been able to, because there's no payer model to pay creative arts therapists or music therapists or drama therapists to really earn not just a living wage, but a professional wage to be able to do this really important work. So it's an allied health profession. And I think we're starting to see that there's a whole new opportunity there where diversity and inclusion is intrinsic in the way the workforce develops.
Oh, I am so sad to say we are almost out of time. I know. What I want to do is, and there are so many good questions, you guys. I am bereft. I can't get to them. But what I do, I see one which says, please repeat the name of Susan's book. And it's Susan Magsamen and her co-author, Ivy Ross. And the book is Your Brain on Art. And I'm a huge fan. Let me just say that.
So am I.
It's great. And it highlights about 100 research projects that speak to what we're talking about tonight. It's the science behind why the arts are so good for us and can actually change our neurology. So, and let's see, I guess I just want to ask if for each of you, is there a resource that you want to offer up for our viewers tonight, whether it's a particular website of your work or a book? Dan, do you want to offer anything, Danny, or what do you think?
Well, there are so many that we utilize. I think it's important for people to tap into organizations like the Alzheimer's Association, the Alzheimer's Foundation of America, Lewy Body Society, and others that can put people in touch with expressive arts programs. And many of them, your local area agencies on aging in counties, caregiver support groups can put you in touch with expressive arts therapists and just artists that are wanting to share their work. My dad was not able to work with an art therapist. I mean, he worked with a retired artist, but they had a bond and it worked. But so I would say that I've got a book about our experience, my reflections on our program, Bringing Art to Life. And it's available on Amazon. And it talks about stories of individual persons, but also kind of the theory behind what we do, and has some of my poetry in there, because here's something that's interesting. I've been so impacted for the past 15 years working with people with dementia that when I tried to write a book about it, I resorted to expressive arts to communicate the nuance and the metaphor and the unspeakable benefit that I've seen in people. So I wrote poetry about it. So that's see, I utilize that.
See, Danny is a demonstration of Susan's work,
Right.
and vice versa. Okay, with that, before we close, I just want to really thank both of you for your time tonight. I know you're both incredibly busy, and I hope our viewers are as pleased with this as I am, and I wish we'd go on. But before we do say goodbye, I want to thank you once again for joining us, everyone, tonight. And the American Brain Foundation hosts free webinars regularly, and we'd love to see you again. This is our last webinar for 2024, but we are working on next year's schedule and have some great ideas cooking. You can follow ABF on social media to stay up to date on our webinars, as well as brain disease information and research. I invite you to visit the Brain and Life website and listen to the Brain and Life podcast. Brain and Life is the official publication of the ABF's partner organization, the American Academy of Neurology, with information and resources to help you keep your brain healthy. You can also support innovative research to find the cures of tomorrow by making a donation to the American Brain Foundation. And no donation is too small. And until the end of the year, as I said, every gift will be doubled to a generous because of a generous matching donor. So please consider making a donation. And I just want to thank you all again very much. Thank you, Danny Potts and Susan Magsamen, and all of our viewers tonight. We appreciate you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure,
Thank you.
Susan. Thank you both. Thank you.
Good night. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.